I think it's part of a bigger really effort around open source and the contributions that open source are making, general in the technology industry, but certainly within telecom. Specifically, what we did in this case is with a couple like-minded companies in a lot of, quite frankly, software that we had written, we went in and we had put it on GitHub earlier. This is a policy engine, access control policy engine. So it's something that you'll use within systems that allow or disallow based on, resources, time of day, role, any of those kind of things. And it's built to something called XACML, Extensible Access Control Markup Language. It's done to the latest specification, which is 3.0, and it had not really been available in open source at that level before that. And so while we had it on github.com, we also found a couple like-minded companies that went together with us, and we put it in Apache Incubator status. And we have Incubator status now. And as we garner more support, we hope to get it to full project status.
Got it. Okay. Now, obviously, like you said, the software is an open source type of platform, which, from my coverage, at least of the telecom side of things, that's a pretty big push for a lot of companies. I know a lot of organizations have popped up looking at open source as a key to what they're doing, whether it's OpenStack or different companies like that. It does seem like that's a really big part of this. And it seems like from what you guys are doing, obviously open source is a pretty important part of this for you guys as well. Yeah,
clearly it is. And you had mentioned OpenStack. There are others, ODL, some work we're doing with the folks in Berkeley on Lab, ONOS. And so, for our standpoint, and I think, again, this is part of a bigger technology push for open source. If you just look at go all the way back to Linux and the contribution that Linux has made to the technology community, you're going to see more and more of that. And I think what's happening is you're starting to see it filter into probably what was considered more specialty technology areas like telecom. And we have our own unique needs associated with that. But I believe that, as we garner more support within the community, and that's one of the reasons you put things back into open source. You say, why do you do this? It's like what you want to do is get broader support rather than what's within your company, get people to fill gaps, do other technologies that are associated with it, and cause it to grow and be something we can all build on and benefit from.
Got it. Makes sense. Okay. Now, obviously, with this new release here, I guess, is there a large focus of this on the telecom side, or do you guys see this as being more of a general, something that could be used at IT centers or data centers as well? I mean, what do you guys view the main focus of this new software you guys have rolled out with?
Yeah, I think it's general. So there are general areas where you'll use policy. It could be in IT systems, it could be in big data systems, it could be in telecom systems, SDN systems. So it's a general purpose, and I think that's good, because what you really want to be able to do is leverage things that are as broad, if you will, as possible. Because open source, that quite frankly has a very narrow community, is essentially a proprietary system. And what you really want to do is get a lot of eyeballs and get a lot of people contributing, because that is I consider kind of a natural hardener, if you will, to the code.
Got it. Okay, that makes sense. Now, I guess when you guys look at this software as well, I guess obviously AT&T is a big proponent, it seems, of software. I know late last year you guys made some announcements about your network as well, doing a lot more software there. Maybe it's a surprise to some people, but you guys have been pretty involved in software for quite some time. I mean, obviously you're a big company, so it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. But you guys have been pretty involved in the software space, especially the telecom side, for years and years. It seems like this just seems like another extension of what you guys have kind of already been doing to an extent.
Yeah, again, I think it gets back to kind of the specialty area. So if you kind of take a look at, what our wheelhouse has been, the contributions that we've probably made in open source has probably not as had a big of impact as, in, the IT space or some other spaces. But as those areas start to converge, you're starting to see more and more our contributions and other people's contributions being important for a wider variety of areas. And so, again, if you go way back, the history of AT&T, things like the C language and Unix and other things like that. But even more recently, we've had a number of contributions. And I think one of the things that differentiates us relative to some of the other folks is in our space is the breadth and depth of which we do this. So we certainly have people that are part of industry initiatives like OpenStack or ODL or ONOS and some other things. But we've also done some things where we've pretty much carried the full load, like in the case of this XACML engine or the 3.0. We actually drove that kind of from cradle to grave. We had the people here write all that to begin with. We had some award-winning software that we built for large scale, large visualization technology called nanocubes. We did all that from scratch as well. And so, and we have people who contribute to the R Foundation. So there's a really broad array of what we've done, and it goes back probably a number of years that we really made a conscious effort to become more and more of a data-driven company. And as you make that direction, then there's certain tools that you need, especially when you're at someone like our scale, to be able to really be a data-driven company. And thankfully, probably 10 plus years ago, we started doing that before kind of big data was a real name. But we've made a lot of contributions in that area within our own company and outside. And we're going to leverage a lot of that, within this SDN area. Like I said, I don't think it's a coincidence that a lot of the folks who first adopted SDN in the data center were a lot of the web scale companies that were in that kind of business. And so there's a natural synergy between those two areas.
Makes sense. Okay. And obviously it seems like too, I mean, you guys are getting a lot of support from within the company as well. I mean, it seems like from the C-level position on down, it seems like, there is this support from AT&T that, hey, you got Randall Stephenson and other people talking about software as being an important part of the company. That's got to be good for you guys working on the software, obviously, to have that kind of support from the top to the highest levels of the company.
Yeah, no, it's definitely fully infused, and it's, all the way throughout the whole stack, top to bottom, where the support is. And, again, I think one thing that's been really good, especially give credit to our top level execs, is they understand that this is not a one-way street. It's not something that we can just be a net consumer of open source software, that we have to be able to help drive a certain direction, and to get credibility within the community, we're going to have to contribute. And that's why you're seeing some of these things we're doing.
Yeah, makes sense. And you guys too, you've been very vocal about this as well. I mean, I know a lot of companies, perhaps aren't doing as much, or they're not even talking about as much, but you guys have been really at the forefront, it seems like, of at least promoting a lot of this virtualization or software moves for, at least for the telecom side, especially. I know I talk to analysts in different companies, and they always bring up the fact that you guys, the Domain 2.0 program, or just the domain program in general, but just over the past several years have been kind of at the forefront of really pushing software, or at least getting the industry to recognize the importance of software, especially for the telecom space. It seems like that's got to be obviously a big part of it too. I mean, you guys are definitely at the forefront there of at least getting that out there and the recognition. And I know I'm talking to companies and analysts, like I said, they always mention you guys as being a big part of that kind of community for at least the telecom side.
Yeah, I might be biased, but I agree. So I will tell you though, when I have like candidates who come in and interview, one of the things that we talk about is like, well, how would you want to change the world? What do you want to do? And a lot of them really cleave to this idea of almost our equivalent of a moon launch of what we're doing in this D2 area. And when I talk to them and I say, think about, you're just getting out of school. A lot of them like fresh PhD candidates and other things like that. I say, you learned about how to build networks, how to build telecom systems, and all those kind of things. I said, imagine 5, 10 years from now, what someone sitting in your chair would look at and say, what did they learn? They're going to learn a totally different way to build telecom systems. They're not going to think about racking equipment and doing other things. They're going to think about, well, I went off and bought this cloud instance. I was able to put the software in for the router, software in for the firewall, et cetera. That's how they'll think about it. So, I mean, it's a fundamental change that's happening.
Yeah, I know I was talking to someone there as well at AT&T earlier, and that was one thing they mentioned, is the fact that it's a cultural change really for the company, and for new employees coming in, it's like they do have to have a different skill set than just traditional legacy type of telecom views on things. It's got to be really, software is a big part of this now, so it seems like these new people coming in have to really have this kind of training, and obviously I know you guys are working with your current employees to do that as well, but it is this big focus that seems to be changing kind of the culture within AT&T.
Yeah, I think there's certainly a skill pivot, and you're right, we are working that inside as well as, the people that we're bringing in. Obviously, there's, no matter how you wrap this, though, there's still, all the same kind of issues that we have regardless of how we built it. So you still have to have those same skills, right? I used to joke with some folks here that, if we were to go into TurboTax or someplace like that, there are a lot of tax professionals there, right? They're not just people writing software. So you have to have that domain knowledge. That's key.
Yeah, and that's a good point too. I know when I talk to companies or new companies getting involved in software focused on telecom, or I guess legacy software getting involved in telecom, that's the one issue. It's always like, how familiar are they with what telecom needs? Because it seems like, obviously software is software to an extent, but telecom has specific requirements. I mean, these are huge networks that are operating today, serving, tens and hundreds of millions of people and generating revenue. to just go in there with some software and try to fix something or change something, that's a bit risky. So you got to make sure that this stuff is all, kind of carrier grade and ready to go. You can't just throw it in there and hope.
Yeah, I know, one of the ways that we contributed to software is we worked with a small company out in Silicon Valley to do this streaming analytics software we call Tygon.
Yep.
And, it's interesting because they had a lot of background in kind of the web scale kind of, companies. So they were used to scale, but not exactly the same kind of scale we did. And so it was interesting when we worked together that, they brought a certain discipline and set of knowledge, to the collaboration, and we brought a different set. And like I said, I think we both really learned something from each other there. But one thing that was really good about them early on was that, they had a much better, kind of place that they were at relative to some other folks that you might be talking about are coming into this kind of green. And I know John Donovan has a great line where he says, you don't have to be 5'9" to walk in the door, but we don't want you to be 9'5". So we don't really want to carry the ball that far down the field, right? Yeah.
That's a good point too, because you're right. It does seem like, some of these companies I've talked to, they seem to be okay with a 3 nines model or something like that. But it does seem like, for telecom, you really can't have that. I mean, people are used to the way things work. And if anything degrades at all, it's a poor customer experience. And at the end of the day, you can't have that. So that 5 nines model is still pretty important. I mean, maybe not the ultimate decider, but it's a pretty important part of it.
Yeah, I think you're still going to get that same reliability. You're going to get it differently. So there's lots of ways that you can build a system that has that kind of reliability. Mm-hmm. And basically, under this new scenario of SDN and NFV, we'll get that same reliability, perhaps even better. We'll just build it differently. It'll be built differently.
Yeah.
And take an example that I talk to people about. Take a look at the way supercomputers used to be built. They were these big vertically stacked things from Cray or other people like that. And now take a look at them. What are they? They're just a whole bunch of servers that are connected together that it's a supercomputer.
Yeah, it's just a bunch of PlayStation 4s all linked together. Next thing you know, it's a different world out there now.
My kids would love that.
It's a different world out there. But, I guess getting back to the software, I mean, obviously one of the parts I read, reading through the release and kind of looking at it was, it seems like there's an automation aspect of this. I mean, that seems like was that a big part of this? Is kind of the automation part of this to kind of, because obviously I know for the telecom side, that's a big part of kind of this move towards virtualization is having automation eventually in place to kind of handle a lot of these decision-making processes.
Right. So basically what you would like to do is to have certain mundane tasks that are well known to be embedded in a software policy and then have that implemented. And again, as long as under certain conditions and you can go grab information about the conditions, the environment, et cetera, you can make a decision that's well known, documented, always the same, 24/7. And so, yeah, that's exactly one of the reasons you need a good policy engine. And I think this will be one of several policy engines that we use. This is going to cover certain aspects, but we'll need other ones that cover constraints, if then else, and other things. So I think we'll probably have much more of a policy framework when it's all said and done, but this is a key aspect for us and a big contribution.
Yeah, that's a good point too, because I've talked to some other companies, not to keep bringing that up, but they kind of always say that, they're at the end of the day, automation is obviously preferred, but there are going to be those decisions that really you don't want to have automated. I mean, there's some things that, like you said, are kind of if then, whatever you need to do, that might be a unique circumstance that hopefully someone is still there to perhaps make the decision. I mean, you want to make it as easy as quick as possible. But at the end of the day, there's probably still going to be some part of this process that automation probably can't handle, or probably you wouldn't want to have handled, I guess.
Yeah, I think what you want it to do is you want to have automation handle all the ones that make sense for it to handle, and then really have your people spend the time on the exceptions where it really makes sense. You don't want them spending their time on mundane tasks that could more easily be handled through automation. And to be honest with you, when you run something at our scale, that's a lot of what you do day to day. So the more we can automate that, the better off we are.
Yeah, that makes sense. Now, I guess how important will it be for this software to kind of get that the Apache project status? I mean, obviously, you guys are working through the incubator process now. Is that going to be is that like kind of an end goal for this? Do you think to really get to that next step, or I'm guessing you guys are pretty confident it will get to that step, but how important will that be for this process?
I think it'll be important. I mean, there is a standard out there already now for XACML, so it's not like we need that to have the standard created. But what we want to do is have this be what I'll call the reference implementation of that standard through Apache. And you're right. Well, I mean, you learn a lot as you start doing this, and that's one of the reasons why we've tried a bunch of different directions, if you will, for how we might want to do open source. Just contributions, part of initiatives, work jointly with a small company, and this one kind of, in a couple of times, do it from scratch. Mm-hmm. And in this case, when we went through and did it from scratch and then went to that next step of making it part of the Apache Incubator, we said we also have to have, it's not just us, no matter how great we think this is, we have to find like-minded companies who are going to go do this with us, that are want to work with us. And so we found 2 or 3 or 4 that are going to be part of the initial incubation, but part of that other work is building that community. That's as, I don't want to say as much as, but that's a large part of, creating this and making it happen, and making that developer experience as seamless as possible, and all those other things you got to go through that, quite frankly, when we worked with that small company in Silicon Valley, Cass, we learned some of that, right? And so we're a lot smarter as a result.
Yeah, makes sense. Okay, all right. I mean, again, the open source community part of this, I mean, it does seem like, I've been covering at least the software side for the telecom industry for about 1.5 years now or so, but it seems like, for a while there was like every week a new organization was popping up that was touting open source. And it was, it seemed like every week, like I said, a different flavor was popping up. And, from the outside looking in, it was like, are there too many of these things popping up? I mean, is there, at the end of the day, there's like an end goal where all this stuff has to work together at some point in the network, and everything has to be, on the same page. And it seemed like initially there's like so many things popping up here that I was like, how are you guys going to, you're slicing the pie so thin, it seems. At the end of the day, it seems like the pie is going to be some crazy flavor that no one really is going to want. So is there any sort of concern that, that maybe, when it comes to the open source community, that there's too many of these organizations or too much specialization, or do you think that's just kind of part of the process? I
think it's part of the process. If you look at any kind of growth area or new area, yeah, always new incumbents. And, the real question is the niche that they found a niche and going to stay a niche, or is a niche that's going to grow and become part of mainstream? And, depending on who you ask, whether they're principals in the company and other things like that, I'm sure they feel differently. But in my opinion, it's part of the natural growth of any industry. And then there's always some kind of coalescing that occurs of this one gained scale, this one had the right ideas. And I think we'll see some of that shake out. But I agree. I don't think we'll have that many in the long run in the end state.
Yeah, that makes sense. Okay, all right. Well, I guess then maybe looking ahead a few more years. I mean, obviously, you guys have kind of put some dates out there, really, what you're looking to do as a company when it comes to virtualization and things like that. Obviously, this is another move by you guys to kind of really push that space. As you look at networks, 5 years from now, that 2020 timeframe, how different are they going to be? I mean, do you still see a lot of legacy there, or do you see kind of that movement, say 5 years from now, where it will be a lot more virtualization as being the new deployment model for telecom networks?
Oh, I definitely see that it'll be the new deployment model for going forward. I think the real question is, there's nothing cheaper than a sunk cost. So if something is doing the job that it needs to do, there's really no reason to pull it out. But all of these pieces of equipment have some natural life cycle associated with them, and as they become, end of life, it will be replaced with things that are virtualizable or already virtualized, to the extent that that's possible. I mean, there are some areas now that probably due to speed or maybe some other things that kind of classic virtualization is not possible, but that changes with time. So 5 years from now, maybe it is. I don't know, because if you went back 5 years and looked at what network function, imagine you had a timeline, or not a timeline, but a set of network functions kind of from easiest to hardest. And then if you could have looked at a particular point in time, how many of those functions could you have virtualized? And, if you took a look every year, it marches this way toward all the way to the hardest function. And so I expect that to continue.
Yeah, and it seems like, I guess, to really make that work, I guess there would be some sort of orchestration layer, and that's going to be a big part of this too, is making sure all the stuff, legacy and new, kind of work together and are able to talk with each other, because that's going to be a big part of this transition, it seems like, from the legacy world to the new world out there.
Yeah, you have that, that's true, but you have that with any new equipment that you put in. So anytime you put new equipment in, you're not ripping out all the old equipment, so they still have to have a way to talk to one another. There still has to be a way for them to connect. And so I don't think that part is dramatically different than what we've had to do anytime we've gone through some kind of, equipment refresh or new cycles. I think what the goal here is that, we'd like to get on the lowest cost, best performing, fastest provisionable network and as we possibly can, as fast as we can.
Yeah.
And I think that's the difference this time, is that what we were putting in for new under the old scenario might not have had all those great new properties that the existing ones didn't have. And so that's going to be more of an impetus for us to do this faster.
Yeah. Yeah. It'd be interesting. Like you said, I mean, looking back 5 years and looking ahead 5 years, I mean, trying to look at the change that's happened over the past 5 years and what will happen. Yeah, it's hard to kind of predict because, again, there are just things that pop up, iPhone or whatever it's going to be. Something's going to pop up that's going to change the dynamic for everything. And so you just don't know what that's going to be. So obviously you got to react to as quick as you can to those things. But
yeah, I think this is a like I said, I think 5 years from now, when I'm interviewing candidates that are fresh out of school, they will certainly have a different model by which they've learned how to build telecom and networks than others have. I think it'll fundamentally change the way it's taught.
Yeah. Yeah.